Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special episode where we examine one of the most critical and far-reaching crises affecting the Horn of Africa and the wider East African region today, the ongoing conflict in Sudan. The crisis began with what has been described as an attempted military coup carried out by the Rapid Support Forces against the legitimate state institutions and the Sudanese armed forces. The outbreak of violence was marked by armed assaults, attacks on strategic institutions, and the rapid escalation of insecurity across the country, pushing Sudan into a devastating political, humanitarian, and security crisis. Today, the conflict extends far beyond Sudan's borders. The instability has generated serious regional consequences, including border insecurity, armed flows, large-scale displacement, pressure on neighboring states, disruption of trade corridors, and growing fears of conflict diffusion across the Horn of Africa and East Africa. In this episode, we will explore the dynamics of the crisis and its regional spillover, the humanitarian challenges caused by refugee movements into neighboring countries, the role of regional organizations such as the African Union and Intergovernmental Authority on development and mediation efforts, as well as the economic impact of instability on cross-border trade routes, informal economies, and regional markets. Joining us this important discussion is Mr. Kiram Tadesse, a specialist in communication and media, consultant and columnist on development politics, international relations, and social affairs. His expertise and regional perspective will help us better understand the wider implications of the Sudan crisis and its impact on regional peace, security, and cooperation. Good evening, Mr. Kiram, and welcome to Sudan in a Week.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me. It's an important moment to unpack the Sudan situation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you with us today. Mr. Kiram, Sudan is one of the founding members of the African Union, yet many observers point to what they see as differing responses by the AU at various stages of Sudan's political crisis. For example, after the change of power during al-Bashir era, the reaction appeared different from the measures taken later following the collapse of the partnership between al-Burhan and Hamdok, when Sudan's membership was suspended. How do you interpret this difference in approach?
Well, it comes from with the fundamental structural issue of the African Union. If we, for instance, start how the conflict progressed into today's shape, or what we are witnessing now, the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Force have evolved into a prolonged, fragmented war with clear regional implications. So what we are seeing is not only a contest for power, basically in the capital, but also the militarization of peripheral regions in Darfur and areas close to border regions. So this matter for the Horn of Africa is a very important. So because Sudan sits at a strategic crossroad linking Sahel and the Red Sea and East Africa. So particularly when we see the African Union's measure specifically from the 2021 hosting of the military and civilian rule in Khartoum, the African Union actually acted as based on its traditional position, because it is important to note the legal and normative framework of the African Union, which the African Union is guided by, such as instruments of the 2000 Lomé Declaration and the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which clearly outline the Union's position against unconstitutional changes of government. Even it describes it as a zero tolerance for military coups and unconstitutional changes of government. So what's happening in Sudan is not different from the other, the African Union is treating other member countries. So in this case, there are arguments, of course, what measures should be taken or not. So if we see that from the peripheral point of view, the African Union is simply following the measures that it would follow.
Do you believe that the African Union is simply applying its institutional principle, or is it indirectly pushing Sudan towards certain political choices?
We can say the implementation capacity issues are there with the African Union, particularly its Peace and Security Council suspending Sudan's participation, but I don't think it's uniquely treating Sudan with all its circumstances hinging there, but with all its capacity or failure or shortcomings, the African Union, I believe, is performing its institutional perspective or moves towards, suspending, because as we have said earlier, it's complying to the Lomé Declaration and the charter that bans any unconstitutional change of government.
And how might this affect the perception of the African Union inside Sudan itself?
Of course, that's a big question, but that's also happening across the continent. This is, as I've said, this is not a one-time incident, particularly in Sudan, but as the people of Sudan are paying the heavy price as we speak, it can send the wrong signal, but it also complies or goes, the African Union, I mean, goes in tandem with active participation and involvement of its member states. So it's a two-way approach, or you can say it's like two faces of one coin, same coin. The issue is there, but the challenges are coming from different dimensions. So it's addressing this particular issue does not simply target the Sudanese people, but it has paramount effect in the region, and not only the Sudanese people, the other neighboring countries.
If you allow me to ask this directly, can regional organizations truly remain neutral in crises of this scale?
Okay. If we take, for instance, regional organizations like the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, there have been regional efforts, but they have faced structural challenges. Okay, the African Union and IGAD have attempted to tackle this issue. However, effectiveness has been limited by political fragmentation among member states. Okay, so AU and even IGAD operates or tries to address this issue from the perspective of its member states, although the principles and guiding principles and frameworks are there. So there are the issues of coordination are also there. The multiple mediation tracks, including those led by external actors, sometimes overlap, convergence. So coordination challenges have remained there. There are gaps that we have observed in coordinating the mediation efforts by regional blocs like IGAD and the African Union. So bringing this together and coordinating would have a paramount importance.
At the same time, Sudan continues to engage within regional frameworks such as IGAD, despite its suspension from the African Union. How do you explain this contrast?
Yeah, as I've mentioned, yes, Sudan have continued to engage with IGAD, although it has been suspended from the African Union. It comes from the framework of the African Union's treatment of unconstitutional toppling of governments. So that's why I have mentioned earlier that there is a clear gap of collaboration, which weakens collective leverage over conflict parties. So here we have to note that Sudan continued its role with IGAD as an important distinction between continental regional mechanisms. So while the African Union applies normative standards, that we have mentioned earlier, the Lomé Declaration and the other charter, so which led to IGAD, Sudan suspension. IGAD tend to prioritize engagement and proximity based diplomatic approach. So that's why we say coordination efforts or coordination should come to bring about real change or resolving the conflict.
Does this reflect a difference in political priorities between regional and continental organizations, or does it suggest that Sudan still maintains strategic importance that cannot be ignored?
It somehow tells us that even in times of political disruption, this East African bloc often keep member states within its process to maintain dialogue channel, while African Union, the bigger institution, tends to stick to that punitive measure. So when we look at it in practice, this creates a dual track system. On one hand, the AU sends a signal about governance standards. On the other hand, IGAD, as we are referencing, maintains practical engagement for mediation and conflict resolution. I would say it's good to maintain the balance between the two, because Sudan is there as a founding member of the African Union, also there as a founding member of the regional bloc IGAD. So there seems a contradiction, but that's why we call for coordination and collaboration in bringing about a sustainable peace or lasting peace in Sudan.
If we are talking about practical terms, how does this affect Sudan's diplomatic position in the region? Or can Sudan realistically compensate for limited engagement with the African Union through organizations like IGAD?
I think this comes with the question of trust in mediation, which is very crucial. For any mediation efforts to be effective, it must be perceived as impartial and credible by the parties involved and by the broader public, specifically the public who are paying the price. So as we all know, concerns have been raised in various contexts, including in Sudan, whether external engagement with different actors may affect perceptions of neutrality. So in such cases, it's important to rely on verified information and avoid contradiction of facts and situations to bring a lasting peace. Yes.
Another issue that continues to raise debate is the relationship between some regional governments and actors involved in the Sudanese conflict. Many Sudanese have questioned why certain countries were able to host Hamidati publicly without facing criticism or measures from the African Union. How has this affected public trust in the AU's role as a mediator?
Well, of course, as public trust is a big currency to bring a lasting peace in Sudan. Let's look at this in a broader way, okay? Both, for instance, AU and IGAD face structural and operational constraints, okay? As they're trying to address this conflict mediation. One of the main challenge here is enforcement capacity. They might have the interests and coordination, let's say, but the enforcement capacity is there. They lack the enforcement capacity. This brings us the involvement of external parties to take bigger hand or bigger role in this whole process. That has been observed for years. So these organizations in particular can facilitate dialogue and propose frameworks, but they often rely on member states, as I have said, to implement and uphold decisions. So still, what we say, African solutions for African problems, that highly relies on the engagement of the parties involved and the member states to have good position, strong stand. Otherwise, it invites external parties to have bigger role. As we know, the Sudan case goes beyond the continent. Other parties are getting involved by involving even member states of these regional blocs. So without further speculation, we are getting reports from multiple sources. Okay, so it's a commitment. It's a dual commitment.
Speaking of that, do you think that the African Union still has enough credibility to play a central role in conflict resolution in Sudan, or has confidence among Sudanese communities been significantly weakened?
The African Union credibility, that's, I think, a debatable issue. For me, it's all about capacity. The African Union lacks capacity. That's why the external parties or powers outside of the continent are getting involved with heavy hand. So in terms of ensuring its credibility, it should have the capacity first of all. So the capacity lacks. So why would it be a question of credibility? The capacity, lack of capacity is already obviously been understood by other parties. So as I've said, this is not the first time.
How important is public perception for the success of any mediation effort, in your opinion?
That's very important. As I've said, it's a big currency to ensure or bring about lasting peace. If public credibility is not there, there will not be sustainable peace. It would only end up stays in the periphery of the whole process. So maintaining credibility among the public, specifically those who are paying the price, okay, the Sudanese people and the communities in the neighboring countries or regions, they should have, of course, trust. In order to build that trust, yeah, as I've said, we have capacity issues in the continental bodies, in regional blocs, but it's important to coordinate resources and capacity so as to ensure.
Mr. Kiram, can mediation, in your opinion, succeed if one side believes the mediator is not fully impartial?
That depends on what is happening in the mediation room. Are they siding one party over the other? Or who is taking the mediation role in this case? So once capacity is built or clear interests are put in place, I don't think there will be an issue. The main thing here is the warring parties are getting support from heavy hands outside of the continent. So in that case, the mediation efforts would also come, under compromise. So they would often get compromised. That puts the whole process into a challenge. That's why the coordination efforts should be there.
So to conclude this chapter, if we can name it a chapter, in general, do you find that the AU and IGAD face other constraints in African conflict mediation?
Of course, they have always been facing these challenges. IGAD has been attempting to mediate Ethiopian warring parties within the Ethiopian border, and it attempted when there was a conflict in northern Ethiopia, and still the credit goes to the United States. Okay, the United States had played significant role in mediating. So these institutions still face the same problem. Look what's happening in West Africa and even other parts of the continent. AU faces the same problem. So it is IGAD's role to play a pivotal role in the region, East Africa in particular. It faces the same challenge because this involves multiple interests, particularly outside of the continent.
Does Ethiopia, because we know that Ethiopia is the headquarters of the AU, feel any pressure if it stands with legitimate African governments? Or does Ethiopia need to align its national stance with the AU's plans?
Ethiopia has plays pivotal role as a seat of the African Union and champion of the African Union establishment. But if we take Ethiopian government in particular, it has its own interests, I believe. So that would definitely be an issue there. However, at the same time, there are also established rules and rules of engagement for the African Union and through which Ethiopia engages and contributes in the peace building of the member states, or Sudan in particular.
If we want to be transparent a bit here, the conflict in Sudan is increasingly being viewed as more than an internal confrontation, especially with reports and international concern regarding the involvement of foreign fighters and cross-border networks. In this context, how do you assess the regional implications of the war between the Sudanese army and the RSF?
It has significant regional implications. Reports are even coming that it really is involving parties within the continent, which are linked to parties or forces outside of the continent. So without even speculating what are the facts or not, it has a significant impact. For instance, if we take the refugee situation, the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, has said since the war broke out, around 14 million people have fled the country.
But how serious are the risks for border stability and the movement of weapons across the region?
East Africa, Horn of Africa was fragile, has always been fragile region, and in this particular time, East Africa has become a very sensitive region due to multiple interests within individual countries and neighboring countries. So that definitely would have effect in for instance, armed in illegal armed trade and involvement of different rebel groups across the borders. So transboundary conflict engagement would definitely be a big issue, as we are witnessing even currently. The border between Ethiopia and Sudan experience the sensitive security issues with the border with Chad and South Sudan are experiencing the same issue. So it has a big transboundary nature, transnational conflict nature, although it would not spill over overnight, or could be seen as causing a significant damage overnight, but it has a nature to cause, like we are saying, sustainable peace. It could cause a sustainable conflict.
So in your opinion, the conflict eventually will spill over into neighboring countries in the Horn of Africa, as you mentioned?
Come again?
I asked you, let me rephrase it. In your opinion, that the conflict will eventually spill over into the neighboring countries of the Horn of Africa?
It's hard to say that it would spill over, but it involves different factions within individual member countries bordering Sudan. But it would unlikely be spilled over into neighboring countries, because all the neighboring countries have their own internal issues. Those internal issues come basically from security, lack of security, and peace and security issues. So that involves different factions, rebel groups, and these rebel groups share resources and armed trade is there, illegal armed trade. So this nature would be there than immediate or eventual spillover.
So, of course, the consequences of the conflict are not limited to security and politics alone. The economic dimension is becoming increasingly important across the region. What are the economic and social impacts of instability on Eastern Sudan corridors and Ethiopian markets?
Okay, the economic impact is already visible as we speak. Sudan played a strategic role in regional trade, particularly as a corridor linking inland economies to the Red Sea. So the instability disrupted these routes, affecting both formal and informal trade. It had been an important corridor for Ethiopia, linking it to Port Sudan and onward to global markets. So this has already been disrupted, and the markets, the communities that had been benefiting from each other in the border areas have already been experiencing this conflict, and this economic damage is already there. The instability in Sudan was affects formal trade routes and the informal, which the communities used to benefit.
We cannot deny that another major consequence of the conflict is the humanitarian shift taking place across the region. Sudan was once one of the largest host countries for refugees, but today we are witnessing massive displacement flows toward neighboring states in the north, south, and east. How do you assess the growing pressure this situation is placing on Ethiopia in particular?
Yes, as the reports say, specifically the UN reports indicate that since the war broke out, over 14 million people have fled their homes, of which around 9 are internally displaced. The remaining have fled to Ethiopia, Chad, Egypt, and South Sudan. So this creates tension among communities in the border areas. For instance, very recently, last week, the aid agency, an aid agency released a report that emergency health issue has been reported in Chad refugee camp for among Sudanese refugees. This has clear implication, according to the report, of or risk of expanding to other African countries. So it could become a continental health emergency issue, not let alone an issue of regional or neighboring countries. So this really affects the communities and neighboring countries. Okay, the host communities often struggle with scarce resources. So when refugees come, there will definitely be tension among the refugees and the host community. So unless managed, there is a tendency this could even escalate into communal or local conflict among the host community and the refugees.
And this also raises questions about integration on the ground. In your opinion, Mr. Kiram, what are the main local integration challenges that Ethiopia may face in dealing with displaced Sudanese communities?
Yes, when we say integration, we mainly refer to the resources available. Okay, so in order to integrate the refugees with the local communities, there should be resources. As we all know that there is no sufficient resource, let alone for refugees, even for local communities. So health, medical, and other emergency food, safety, even education and other basic needs are there. So this would protract into tension among the host community and the refugees. So integrating this takes a huge resource and coordination efforts from the host country with coordination with the the aid agencies. So as we know, aid is declining across the globe. That would also signal that the implication is far more reaching.
Mr. Kiram, in your opinion, how will Ethiopia face international criticism for the humanitarian situation of war refugees?
Well, as we speak, the humanitarian dimension is one of the most immediate and visible impact of the conflict. So the humanitarian dimension of Sudan's conflict is already severe. That's understandable. And the challenge is not only left for Ethiopia, but particularly for other four countries, three countries, actually neighboring countries, including Chad, South Sudan, and Egypt. So, if we take, for instance, the latest report by the United Nations Refugee Agency, as of April this year, 15 million people have been forced from their homes. This includes 9 million internally displaced persons within Sudan. So the remaining have fled to the neighboring countries. So Ethiopia has to play a significant role in hosting these communities, so as to keep its track record of hosting refugees for years. And the mismanagement or the ill happening of any situation in relation to refugee handling could send a negative signal in the international community about the country. But it comes to resource management, collaboration, coordination, and tackling the challenges of resource scarcity and balancing the interests of the host community with the refugees coming into the country's border, particularly to Amara and Benishangul Gumuz region, where many of these refugees are coming and sheltered.
Mr. Kiram, one last question for you. The Terrorist Rapid Support Forces, RSF militia, is executing a separatist scheme in the event that it fails to occupy all of Sudan. It has expressed this by forming a parallel government called the Founding Government in the areas it occupies, a move rejected by United Nations organizations. However, how can East African countries confront any rebel movements in the Horn of Africa, especially if they are separatist movements supported from outside the African continent?
Mm-hmm. There are rules of engagement there. There are rules established, frameworks. East African member countries have the IGAD framework for that matter. So I think it is paramount importance that they engage these warring parties in partial manner, so that the civilians should not pay the heavy price. The price is being paid by the civilians more than anything. So Sudanese people are paying heavy price. Children, women are suffering as we speak. So it's very important that the East African member countries coordinate and the mediation effort and so as to bring about a lasting peace in Sudan. Otherwise, the conflict is getting more intense, as we have mentioned earlier, that the involvement of external parties is giving more leverage to the warring parties, including RSF. The emergency vehicles are being targeted by drone attacks. So this shows advancement of the conflict to another level. So it is very important to coordinate efforts. As we have mentioned earlier, the main issue here is a lack of coordination. among the member states. So they have to coordinate and really engage in mediation efforts and restore peace.
True.
in Sudan.
True. I agree with you, Mr. Kiram. And before we conclude, I would like to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to you, to our distinguished guest, Mr. Kiram Tadesse, for his valuable insights and thoughtful analysis on one of the most pressing crises shaping our region today. Thank you, Mr. Kiram.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Tonight's discussion has made one reality very clear. The conflict in Sudan is no longer contained within regional borders. It has evolved into a regional challenge with serious implications for security, humanitarian stability, economic resilience, and diplomatic relations across the Horn of Africa and East Africa. We have examined its widening impact, from border insecurity and displacement flows to growing humanitarian pressures on neighboring countries, particularly Ethiopia. We also highlighted the complex role of regional and continental institutions and the difficulties they face in mediating such a multifaceted and rapidly evolving crisis. At its core, this conflict underscores a critical truth. No country in the region is isolated from the consequences. The stability of Sudan is directly tied to the stability of its neighbors. What happens there will continue to shape the political and security landscape of the entire region. This is why the path forward cannot rely on escalation or fragmentation, but on sustained dialogue, coordinated regional engagement, and a genuine commitment to peace. Thank you for joining us for this exceptional episode and for being part of this important conversation. Stay informed and see you in the next episode. Goodbye.